There are places in America where the silence is so deep it presses against your ears, where the only things moving are clouds and the odd flake of dust carried across fields of yellow grass. Bozeman's livestock auction sat in such a patch of nowhere, hugged by distant blue mountains and the hum of nervous animals. The air inside the barn was thick with the scent of sweat, straw, and money-changing hands. Buyers, mostly ranchers and wranglers in faded jeans, leaned against rails, boots scuffed and hats low, eyes sharp for bargains and muscle. Eliza Wren stood at the edge of the ring with a sketchbook in her hand, the stub of a pencil tucked behind her ear. She hadn't meant to come. In truth, she'd promised herself never to set foot in this place again. Not after the funeral. Not after burying all those dreams in cold earth. But grief is a wild animal. Sometimes it drives you out of the house, down old roads, right back to where your life began, unraveling. She told herself she was here just to sketch. She'd been filling pages with horses, manes rippling, muscles coiled, sometimes wild, sometimes weary. It was her way of holding on to something that still felt alive. As she worked, her eyes kept drifting toward the auctioneer's platform, where voices rose and fell with each lot. Most of the animals brought up today were hardy stock, big, glossy, the kind that would fetch a good price. The crowd murmured approval, hands shot up, the numbers climbed, and the hammer fell with the same dry finality each time. Then the handler let out lot 47. At first, nobody seemed to notice the white mare. She was small for her breed, ribs sharp as fence posts beneath a patchy coat. Her left eye was cloudy, staring at nothing, while her right eye held a fear so deep it made Eliza shiver. Dark scars, raw and angry, ran down her flank, and the telltale stripes of a whip stood out against the dirt-caked fur. When she moved, her steps were short and uneven, and yet her silence was louder than any whinny or cry, a kind of desperate resignation that filled the barn and made the air heavy. The auctioneer tried to crack a joke about saving on feed, but even the regulars shifted uncomfortably. One or two men made faces, shaking their heads. The mare didn't spook or fight. She just stood, still as a ghost, her head bowed. "Who'll start me off at $50? The auctioneer called, scanning the crowd. Silence. Eliza felt her breath catch. For a long moment, she was a child again. Hiding in the loft above her parents' barn, drawing pictures of horses and listening to them breathe below. Back then, every animal had a story. Every scar meant something. Her hand rose before she'd made a conscious decision. 50, she said, voice clear, echoing in the hush. Heads turned. A heavy-set man in a checkered shirt snorted. "Lady, that thing's not worth the gas to haul her home." The auctioneer's gavel hovered. 50. Do I hear 60? Nothing. Not a single hand moved. Going once. Going twice. Sold. To the brave soul in the back. He laughed, shaking his head. "You're crazy, miss." Maybe she was, but as she watched the handler try to coax the mare toward the loading area, no fight, just stubborn refusal to meet any gaze, Eliza knew she was doing the right thing, even if she didn't understand why. She waited while the paperwork was filled out, her hands trembling so hard she could barely sign her name. Nobody offered to help. One rancher muttered something about sentimental city folks, but Eliza ignored him. At the stockyard, she walked up to the mare with slow, careful steps, speaking softly. "It's okay. I'm not going to hurt you. You're coming home with me." The mare's ear flicked, but she didn't back away, didn't lash out. That told Eliza something. Pain can make animals mean, but sometimes it just makes them quiet. Getting her into the old horse trailer was a challenge. The handler offered to use a whip. Eliza refused, gritting her teeth. She coaxed and waited, using an apple from her coat pocket and gentle words. After nearly 20 minutes, the mare stepped up, not because she trusted Eliza, but because she had nowhere else to go. The drive back to her parents' abandoned property took nearly an hour. The wind whistled through cracks in the trailer, and Eliza kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half afraid the mare would collapse, but she stayed on her feet, swaying with each turn. The barn hadn't been used in years. Dust blanketed every surface, cobwebs hung in the rafters like old lace. But it was shelter. Eliza had spent the last week sweeping and mending fences, fixing up the old stall, maybe for another project, maybe just for something to do. She backed the trailer up to the gate and lowered the ramp. The mare, no, she needed a name, stood, watching, unblinking. Eliza thought of the ashes in her fireplace, the way loss burns everything down until only something brittle and pale remains. Ash, she said quietly. That's what I'll call you. It fit. Ash didn't move for a long time. Eliza didn't rush her. Finally, the mare stepped off the ramp, hooves clicking softly on the wood. Eliza led her into the stall, unlatched the halter, and set a bucket of water and a scoop of grain nearby. Night fell heavy and cold. Eliza checked on Ash every hour. The mare didn't touch the food. She stood, silent and unmoving, her breath fogging the dark. Outside, coyotes called across empty fields. Inside, grief and hope settled in the corners of the barn like restless spirits. As Eliza finally sat down on a bale of hay, sketchbook resting on her knees, she realized she hadn't felt this kind of purpose in months, not since before the world had changed, not since before everything she loved had burned down. Maybe, just maybe, this broken mare was here to save her, too. The Montana dawn was a reluctant guest, sliding through the cracks in the barn walls like an old friend who wasn't sure she belonged anymore. Eliza Wren awoke stiff and cold on a hay bale, heart pounding with the uncertainty that always lingered after big decisions. For a second, she doubted whether the events of yesterday were even real, but the scent of horses, raw and honest, brought everything back. The grief, the purchase, the scarred white mare named Ash. Before coffee, before checking her phone or changing out of her worn jeans, Eliza pulled on boots and walked quietly out to the barn. The silence inside was thick, broken only by the soft shifting of hooves on straw. She braced herself for the worst, unsure if Ash would even be alive after the trauma she'd endured. But the mare was there, upright in the stall, still as glass. Eliza watched her from the doorway for a long moment, studying the way morning light picked out every rib, the twitch of skin where old wounds still lingered. Ash's head was lowered, and she hadn't touched her food or water. Her tail hung limp, her body radiating exhaustion and uncertainty. Eliza approached slowly, letting her boots scuff against the floor so the mare would know she was coming. "Morning, girl," she said softly, careful not to let hope creep into her voice. "Didn't get much sleep, huh? Me neither." The day's first job was simple. Document Ash's condition, every mark and wound. Eliza set up her phone to take photos, careful not to use flash, and brought her sketchbook out, pencil ready. As she moved closer, she saw the details more clearly, the raised welts striping Ash's flanks, the angry red of half-healed lashes. Hooves cracked and overgrown, spots on her skin where the hair had been burned away, evidence of some cruel training method or careless handler. She didn't need a vet to tell her these were the scars of repeated abuse. Ash flinched when Eliza lifted her arm to take a picture, and Eliza's stomach twisted. She moved slower, quieter. Her sketches, usually full of life and motion, captured only stillness, a rigid tension in Ash's neck, the slant of her clouded left eye, the way her ears pinned flat when anyone got too close. It became a ritual. Each morning and evening, Eliza would come to the barn, never rushing, always talking in a low, gentle voice. She brushed Ash's coat with long, even strokes, feeling the mare's flinches lessen by fractions each day. The brush glided over old burns, paused at places where the skin was still tender. Eliza murmured stories about the farm, about her parents, about dreams she'd once had of filling this barn with life again. She tried to fill the silence with memories, with hope, with something warmer than the fear that gripped Ash. At first, Ash would barely acknowledge her presence. She avoided all eye contact, standing in the farthest corner of the stall, shuddering when Eliza moved too close. But she never kicked, never bared her teeth. Her submission was total and heartbreaking, her spirit battered into a quiet that was almost worse than violence. On the third morning, something changed. Eliza had brought a bucket of warm mash, oats, molasses, and a little apple, just the way her father used to make for old horses. She set it down and stepped away, watching. Ash sniffed the air, took a cautious step forward, and finally dipped her nose into the bucket. It wasn't much, just a few tentative mouthfuls, but it was a start. Eliza let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. "That's it, girl. You're safe here. Nobody's going to hurt you." She stayed, crouched quietly just outside the stall, sketchbook in hand, drawing Ash's tentative movements, the way she kept glancing up with one good eye, as if checking that this kindness wasn't a trick. That afternoon, Clara, the Wren family's nearest neighbor, stopped by with a bag of carrots and a skeptical look. "You're really keeping her?" Clara asked, leaning on the fence, her breath fogging in the chilly air. "Everyone at the auction thinks you're out of your mind." Eliza shrugged. "Probably am." Clara peered into the stall, eyes softening at the sight of Ash's bony frame. "She's a mess, Eliza. You know that, right?" "She's not just a mess," Eliza replied, her voice firmer than she felt. She's a survivor. And so am I." Clara didn't press. Instead, she handed Eliza the carrots, nodding once before heading back toward her own pickup. Eliza took one, sliced it into small chunks, and offered it on her open palm through the slats of the stall. Ash sniffed the air, wary, but after several minutes of tense hesitation, took a piece, lips brushing Eliza's fingers. Each evening, Eliza brushed Ash's coat in silence, feeling the tension in the mare's muscles begin to ebb ever so slightly. She talked, not expecting any response. Stories about the barn, about the horses she'd loved as a child, about the loss that had driven her to the edge of the world. Sometimes she just sat and sketched, letting Ash get used to her presence, her scent, her sound. Gradually, Ash's body language shifted. Where once she'd held herself rigid, eyes wide and darting, she began to blink slower, her head lowering in cautious acceptance. She no longer pressed herself into the corner when Eliza entered. Sometimes she even watched Eliza's movements, curiosity flickering beneath the fear. It was as if the echoes in the barn, the memories of past pain and loss, were slowly being replaced by something quieter, something hopeful. One rainy evening, thunder rolling in the distance, Eliza lingered in the barn longer than usual. The storm battered the roof, making the old boards creak and moan. Ash startled at each loud clap, but when Eliza sat quietly outside her stall, humming an old lullaby, the mare's breathing slowed, her posture relaxing. For the first time, Ash seemed to find comfort in another's presence. The storm outside nothing compared to the turmoil she'd endured. That night, as Eliza walked back to the house, soaked and shivering, she realized the barn wasn't just echoing with old pain anymore. It was filling, slowly, with new memories. Ones built on trust, patience, and the smallest beginnings of healing. In her journal, Eliza wrote, "She's starting to trust me. Or maybe she just has nothing left to lose. Either way, we're both still here. That's something." The Montana sky was bruised purple with storm clouds when Eliza returned to the barn the next morning, arms full with a new bale of hay and a resolve that felt tougher than anything she'd known in months. Her nights were still restless, haunted by the echoes of her husband's laughter and the image of Ash's trembling form standing alone, but each morning in the barn gave her something to fight for. Ash had eaten more the night before, a real victory, and the mare's gaze tracked Eliza with less suspicion now, sometimes even pausing as if weighing the possibility of trust. Eliza set about her chores, humming softly, her motions slow and careful. With the day's routine, brushing, feeding, documenting the healing process, Eliza started to notice details she'd missed before. As she ran the soft brush gently along Ash's neck, her fingers brushed against a raised patch beneath the horse's tangled mane. It was almost hidden, just a faint distortion beneath the skin, but when she pushed aside the white hair, she saw it. A brand. The scarred skin formed a half circle with letters burned into flesh. CR. Eliza's heart hammered. The mark was cruel, precise. Not the simple initials a loving rancher might use, but something institutional, severe. She fumbled for her phone, snapping several photos from different angles, then traced the lines in her sketchbook for good measure. Sitting on a milking stool outside the stall, Eliza started searching. A quick online hunt for Montana horse brands turned up a database. Years of registrations, most now out of use. She flipped through the records, eyes narrowing. The CR belonged to a name that turned her blood cold. Carl Redford. Redford's reputation had haunted Montana for years. He was infamous in the racing world, a man who squeezed speed from horses the way others might squeeze juice from lemons, brutal and wasteful. Rumors about his methods abounded: whips laced with wire, illegal stimulants, starvation diets, and even midnight disappearances of horses too broken to run anymore. There had been investigations, but nothing ever stuck. Redford was always one step ahead, protected by money, connections, and a willingness to intimidate witnesses. Eliza shivered, the memory of Ash's scars suddenly sharper, more real. She flipped through old news stories, her fingers trembling. There it was. A photo of Redford at a county fair, standing beside a line of white and gray horses. In the background, a young mare with the same clouded eye, the same proud, haunted stance. Ash. A wave of anger and helplessness surged through Eliza. For a long minute, she just sat, clutching her sketchbook. She felt the urge to scream, to break something, but instead, she forced herself to breathe. This wasn't just an injured horse anymore. Ash was evidence. Evidence of pain, and of a man who thought he'd never be caught. Eliza decided, right there on the dusty barn floor, that she would gather everything she could. If nobody else would stand up for Ash, she would. She started by creating a digital folder labeled Case File, Ash. She filled it with her sketches, photos of every lash mark, and careful notes about Ash's injuries, locations, depths, ages. She noted her daily feeding and behavior, documenting every tremor, every change in demeanor. It wasn't enough. She needed expert opinions. After lunch, Eliza called the local vet, but the receptionist said he was booked out for weeks. Desperate, she dug through her parents' old Rolodex, searching for any other name. At the back, in faded ink, she found a card. Dr. Francis Frank Harlan, retired equine specialist. She dialed the number, expecting a disconnected tone. Instead, after several rings, an old voice crackled on the line. "Harlan here." Eliza introduced herself and explained the situation. The abused mare, the brand, the connection to Redford. There was a long pause. "Redford, huh? I know the type," Frank said, his voice low. "Bring her over tomorrow morning. I'll take a look. No charge." That night, Eliza's dreams were jagged with anxiety. She saw Ash running down a moonlit track, Redford's shadow looming behind, whip raised, each lash echoing into endless darkness. She woke before dawn, sweat-soaked, resolve hardened. Loading Ash into the trailer was easier this time. The mare followed her slowly, ears flicked forward, as if she understood that something important was happening. The drive to Dr. Harlan's small ranch on the outskirts of Bozeman was quiet, broken only by the sound of rain on the windshield and Ash's quiet shifting in the back. Frank Harlan was waiting by the barn, gray hair wild, hands steady and kind. He watched Ash with a practiced eye, taking in every wound, every detail of her posture. He didn't flinch when he saw the brand. "I've seen Redford's handiwork before," he muttered. "Never had the proof." For nearly an hour, he examined Ash, documenting injuries, asking Eliza questions about her behavior, feeding, scars. He dictated a statement while Eliza recorded, describing the likely timeline and cause of each injury in clinical detail, making sure to note the signs of repeated trauma and neglect. When he finished, Frank handed Eliza a folder, thick with notes and copies of photos he'd taken. "You keep pushing. Don't let this go. Redford's done enough damage to this valley." Eliza left his ranch with her resolve burning bright. She now had expert testimony to back up her sketches and photos, a body of evidence that might finally hold Redford accountable. Driving home, she imagined what it would mean for Ash. Not just justice, but a kind of freedom, a world where the past could be left behind. That afternoon, Eliza set up a corkboard in the old kitchen, pinning up every photo, every sketch, every scrap of evidence. She felt the enormity of the task ahead, but also a flicker of hope. She wasn't powerless. Not anymore. As the sun set, Eliza returned to the barn, where Ash waited, her eyes a little softer, her stance less haunted. Eliza whispered, "We're going to get you justice. I promise." For the first time, Ash turned her head and met Eliza's gaze. Just for a second. It was enough. In that brief connection, all the scars, all the pain, seemed to shimmer with the possibility of something better. A truth finally coming into the light. The following morning arrived brisk and bright, the Montana sun streaming across the fields, drying up the last of the rain. Eliza Wren barely noticed the beauty outside her window. Her kitchen table was a chaos of evidence. Printouts of photos, Dr. Harlan's statement, her sketches of Ash's injuries, and scribbled notes about timelines and behaviors. The corkboard on the wall looked like a detective's war room, pinned with photos, diagrams, and a single headline with Carl Redford's name circled in red. Eliza knew justice didn't come easy, especially in small towns where powerful men had friends in every bar, every back office. But she also knew that if she didn't act, Ash's suffering and the suffering of countless other horses would remain invisible. Her first call that morning was to Dr. Harlan, confirming he'd be willing to sign an official affidavit and testify if necessary. He agreed, adding in his dry, gravelly voice, "Redford won't like it, but it's about time someone put a boot up his tail." Her second call, the harder one, was to a law office in Bozeman. The voice on the line belonged to Rachel Bell, a junior lawyer who had grown up riding horses at county fairs and still wore her long hair in a braid. Rachel listened without interrupting as Eliza explained Ash's rescue, the evidence, and Redford's history. When Eliza finished, there was a long pause. "That's a hell of a story," Rachel finally said. "Bring everything to my office this afternoon. We'll go through what's admissible and what's not. I'll tell you straight, animal cruelty cases are hard to win, especially when the defendant has deep pockets. But you've got more than most ever do." Packing up the evidence felt surreal. Each photo, each page of notes felt heavier than paper should. Eliza loaded her box into her battered Ford and headed into town, Ash's case file on the passenger seat like a silent promise. Rachel's office was cramped but sunlit, with stacks of horse magazines beside the legal texts. She laid out Eliza's evidence, sorting it into piles. Some things, like Eliza's hand-drawn sketches, might not hold up in court alone, but paired with Dr. Harlan's medical statements and photos, they became a powerful narrative. Rachel highlighted the importance of chain of custody, proving the photos and injuries documented belonged to Ash and that she had been in Redford's care. Eliza produced the bill of sale from the auction, which, to Rachel's visible relief, clearly listed Ash as coming from Redford's lot. The lawyer nodded. "You've got a solid start. We'll need to track down any other witnesses, anyone who worked Redford's stables, other buyers, anyone who saw Ash before you did. And be careful, Redford's not known for playing fair." Eliza drove home with a new sense of purpose. She knew the road ahead would be rough, that Redford's influence could poison any attempt at justice. But now she had an ally, and every detail she gathered tightened the threads that might one day pull the truth into daylight. That evening, Eliza approached Ash's stall with a new halter. The old rope one was frayed and rubbed at the mare's delicate skin. She spoke quietly, letting Ash sniff the leather, rubbing her nose with gentle hands. The mare's sides heaved, unsure. But for the first time, Ash let Eliza slip the halter over her head without a violent flinch or a desperate step away. There was a shimmer of trust in her movement, a belief that maybe not all humans meant pain. Eliza decided to try something new, a short walk outside. She opened the stall, clipped the lead to Ash's new halter, and waited. At first, Ash froze, legs locked, ears flicked back. Eliza didn't pull. She waited, patient as the sunrise. After a long, trembling minute, Ash took one tentative step, then another, her hooves striking the barn floor like hesitant music. They walked out into the field, sunlight glinting off the mare's battered coat. The wind caught Eliza's hair, tangling it across her cheeks. She barely breathed as Ash sniffed the air, muscles twitching with old fear, but she followed, step by slow step, out into the world she'd been denied for so long. The walk was short, just to the old apple tree and back, but to Eliza, it felt monumental. Ash's progress was slow, sometimes pausing as if waiting for a blow that never came. But every step was a thread connecting past pain to future hope. When they returned to the barn, Ash's breathing was calmer, her eyes softer. Eliza hugged the mare's neck, overwhelmed with gratitude and sorrow, knowing that every moment of trust was a small miracle earned through patience and love. That night, Eliza sat in the barn under the yellow glow of a single bulb, updating her journal with every detail, the way Ash hesitated before stepping into sunlight, the way her ears flicked when Eliza spoke, the soft rumble of her first tentative nicker. She thought of Redford, the weight of his cruelty hanging over their progress, but she also thought of Rachel Bell's promise, of Dr. Harlan's testimony, of the slow but steady unraveling of secrets. Threads of justice were being woven, strong and deliberate, connecting Eliza's grief, Ash's pain, and the hope that truth, once exposed, could never be erased. In the quiet, Eliza whispered, "You're not alone anymore, Ash. We're in this together." The barn was silent, but the mare's eyes glimmered with the first sparks of trust. Eliza woke before dawn, the night's anxieties still tangled around her like cold sheets. She had dreamed of Ash running through endless fields, only to stumble at every shadow. The dreams were always the same, danger lurking at the edges, justice still just out of reach. But morning brought resolve. She dressed quickly and checked on Ash, who greeted her with a soft nicker. The mare's coat shone faintly in the dim barn light, and for a moment Eliza allowed herself to believe things were turning around. After feeding Ash and mucking out the stall, Eliza called Clara. Her neighbor had always been fiercely loyal, a friend who showed up with casseroles when Eliza's husband died, and who never hesitated to call out nonsense when she saw it. Clara arrived a half hour later, her old truck rattling down the gravel driveway. She stepped out with a flashlight, her expression both curious and determined. "You said you found something weird in the paperwork?" Clara asked, tucking her red hair under a faded ball cap. "Not paperwork," Eliza said, voice low. "But something's off. I need another set of eyes." Together, they set out across the property toward the northern fence line, where Eliza had discovered old tire tracks the day before. The morning was still gray, mist crawling low over the grass, the world muffled and strange. Beyond the fence line stood Redford's abandoned training shed, a relic from decades ago, half collapsed and hidden behind wild lilacs and a tangle of weeds. Rumor had it Redford still used the place on occasion, but nobody ever saw him there by daylight. The two women hopped the fence and moved quietly, boots crunching on broken branches. As they approached the shed, Clara scanned the ground with her flashlight, revealing hoof prints and old stains in the dirt, too many for any wild animal. Eliza's heart thudded with each step, the air inside the shed colder than it had any right to be. The inside smelled of rot, copper, and something sharper, fear maybe. In the faint light, they found what Eliza dreaded, ropes hanging from the rafters, stiff with old blood. A pile of whips, some cracked, others sticky, were tossed in the corner. The branding iron lay half buried in sawdust, its metal blackened and stained. Eliza knelt, holding her breath, and snapped photos of everything. Clara stood silent, jaw clenched, eyes glistening with anger and disgust. "This is sick," Clara whispered. "You were right. He was hurting them here." Eliza swallowed hard, the realization settling heavy in her chest. He's been doing this for years. Nobody ever stopped him. Suddenly, gravel crunched outside. Headlights swept through the slats in the shed wall, illuminating the dust. Clara's eyes widened. "Someone's here!" They ducked down, hearts pounding. A battered pickup, Redford's, unmistakable with its faded green paint and cracked bumper, pulled up and stopped. Voices drifted in through the broken wall, low and angry. Eliza peeked through a gap. Redford and a younger man unloaded sacks of feed and something bulkier, wrapped in tarp. "Did you lock the damn shed last night?" Redford's voice was gravelly and sharp. "I did, boss. I swear." Well, someone's been poking around. Find anything missing, you tell me. Eliza's hands shook as she tried to record video on her phone. Beside her, Clara mouthed, "We need to go. Now." They crawled along the shadowed back wall and slipped out the side door, barely breathing. Keeping low, they darted into the overgrown grass, moving fast toward the fence. The pickup's engine started up again, and Redford's headlights swept close. For a split second, Eliza thought they'd been spotted, but the truck pulled away, bumping down the dirt road and disappearing into the mist. Back on Eliza's side of the property, the two women sagged against the fence, panting. Clara let out a shaky laugh. "You ever want to rob a bank? Don't call me." "Sorry," Eliza said, the adrenaline making her hands tremble. "But we got what we needed. More evidence." They hurried back to the barn, where Ash greeted them with a high, anxious whinny. Eliza stroked the mare's muzzle, whispering soothing nonsense. She felt a pang of guilt for leaving Ash alone, but her determination was stronger than ever. That afternoon, Eliza uploaded the photos and videos, labeling everything with date and time. She emailed Rachel Bell and Dr. Harlan, sharing the new evidence. Rachel called back within the hour, voice urgent. "This is big, Eliza. The tools, the whips, the branding iron, they'll need forensics, but this ties Redford directly to cruelty. And if you saw him there today, that's recent activity. We need to move fast." Eliza agreed, promising to stay alert. But as evening fell, a sense of unease crept in. She double-checked the locks on every door, kept the porch light blazing, and brought Ash a handful of fresh carrots. The mare was jittery, pacing the stall. Each sound outside made her tense, muscles bunched and ready to bolt. Eliza stayed with her until midnight, listening to the wind, remembering Redford's hard eyes in the shed. Just before dawn, Eliza woke to the sound of hooves striking wood. She ran to the barn, heart racing. Ash was restless, sweat glistening along her neck, eyes wide and wild. Eliza calmed her, singing quietly until the mare's breathing slowed. It was then she understood. Ash could sense danger in the air, could feel that the shadows outside were moving closer. Eliza lay awake the rest of the night, listening to the old house creak and the distant howls of coyotes. In the first pink light of morning, she made a promise to Ash and to herself. No matter what Redford tried, she would not back down. Justice was coming, and this time, she wouldn't be alone. In the fragile dawn, Ash finally ate from Eliza's hand, her eyes watching the barn door, waiting for threats. But as Eliza stroked her neck, she felt something new, the beginnings of hope, woven through the fear. In the barn's long shadow, survivor and savior stood together, ready for whatever darkness might come next. The days that followed their escape from Redford's training shed felt tense and unsettled, as if the entire farm was holding its breath. Eliza hardly slept, and Clara checked in by phone each night, the two women speaking in hushed, urgent tones. Even Ash seemed on edge. Her progress stalled, her eyes once again wide and fearful, her nights spent pacing her stall or standing motionless in the dark. The sense of threat was everywhere, in the squeal of old floorboards, the groan of the wind, and the way headlights sometimes swept the gravel road late at night. Eliza doubled her precautions. She reinforced the barn's doors with steel brackets, replaced the old locks with sturdy padlocks, and left floodlights burning until dawn. Clara insisted she keep her cell phone close, and Rachel Bell, now deep into building the case, reminded her to document everything. Eliza kept her camera by the kitchen window, her keys in her pocket, her nerves taut as wire. One night, as a cold spring rain battered the roof, Eliza sat at the kitchen table, sifting through Rachel's latest emails. The lawyer was hopeful. The evidence from the shed, combined with Ash's vet records, and Dr. Harlan's testimony, was enough to launch a formal investigation. Rachel planned to deliver everything to the sheriff's office the next morning. Exhausted but restless, Eliza went to check the barn one last time before bed. The clock read just after midnight. The fields were slick with mud, the sky flickering now and then with distant lightning. She slipped into her raincoat, pulled on boots, and hurried across the yard, flashlight swinging in her grip. The barn was still, the only sounds Ash's uneven breaths and the steady drip of water from the eaves. Eliza stroked the mare's neck, whispered soft reassurances, then began her nightly rounds, checking windows, doors, and latches. She was about to turn back to the house when a sharp, metallic clatter split the silence. It came from the far side of the barn, the door leading to the storage room, which Eliza had padlocked just days before. She froze, heart hammering. Another bang, louder, more urgent. A man's low mutter cut through the rain. Panic flooded her veins. Eliza ducked behind a stack of hay bales, phone trembling in her hand. She dialed 911, whispering her address and the words, "Someone's breaking into my barn. He's dangerous. Please hurry," before dropping the phone in her pocket. The operator's calm voice faded into static as she crept along the shadows. Lightning flared, illuminating the face at the door. Carl Redford, soaked and furious, his features twisted in rage. He slammed his shoulder into the door again, the hinges groaning. Behind her, Ash let out a terrified snort and began to rear, hooves striking the wooden stall. Eliza pressed herself lower, fighting the urge to run. Redford cursed, yanking at the lock. Ash's panic grew. The mare's breath came in rapid bursts, her muscles shaking. She slammed her hooves into the stall again, harder, louder. Wood splintered. Redford spun, eyes narrowing as he heard the noise. For one harrowing second, Eliza thought he'd seen her, but Ash exploded, kicking out with a strength born of terror. The stall door gave way with a deafening crack. Ash bolted out, wild and free, crashing into Redford, who stumbled back with a grunt. He grabbed at her mane, but Ash reared, lashing out. Her hoof caught him in the arm. Redford yelled, stumbling away, and Ash barreled toward the open barn door and into the stormy night. Eliza scrambled to her feet, heart racing. She grabbed a pitchfork from the wall, brandishing it as Redford rounded on her. "You crazy," he snarled, but didn't finish. Sirens wailed in the distance, blue lights flickering over the horizon. Redford glanced at the open door, at the wild-eyed woman facing him with a pitchfork, and made a run for it, slipping on the wet grass as he bolted for his truck parked at the edge of the property. The police arrived in a blur of noise and light. Officers jumped from their cruisers, guns drawn, shouting orders. Redford tried to duck into his truck, but an officer tackled him to the ground, handcuffs flashing in the rain. Within minutes, he was pinned in the mud, his face pressed to the earth, curses lost in the thunder. Eliza, shaking, explained everything. How Redford had broken in, how Ash had panicked and broken free. She led the officers through the barn, showing the broken stall, the kicked-down door, the muddy footprints, Rachel's files, Ash's evidence, the digital photos. All of it was ready for the officers to collect. The police took statements, photographs, and the video Eliza had recorded on her phone. The lead officer, a woman named Deputy Hall, promised Redford would be held on possession charges for the weapons and substances found in his truck. "He's not getting out anytime soon," she assured Eliza, her hand warm and steady on Eliza's shoulder. The adrenaline crash came only after the officers left. Eliza wandered out into the field with a flashlight, calling for Ash. For nearly an hour she searched, her voice hoarse. At last, just as the rain eased, she spotted a flash of white moving between the trees. Ash stood, sides heaving, mud caked on her legs, but otherwise unhurt. When Eliza approached, the mare didn't flinch. She let Eliza guide her home, step by cautious step, back to the safety of the barn. Inside, Eliza collapsed against the stall, pressing her forehead to Ash's neck. The horse, trembling but alive, let out a long, shuddering sigh. Dawn crept in slow and golden, glinting off the broken wood and the muddy tracks leading to the barn. For the first time, Eliza felt the full weight of what she and Ash had survived, the terror, the chaos, and the wild hope that still clung to them both. She whispered, voice thick, "He can't hurt you anymore. Not while I'm here." And Ash, battered but unbroken, blinked slowly, her silence now filled with something new, a fragile trust forged in the crucible of fear. The air in Bozeman's courthouse was different from the mountain air Eliza knew, sharp, clinical, buzzing with whispers and the shuffle of official shoes on polished tile. It was a place that had seen its share of heartbreak, and today, Ash's story would echo through its halls. Rachel Bell met Eliza on the courthouse steps. She was armed with a portfolio bursting with evidence. Photos of Ash's scars, Dr. Harlan's affidavits, sketches, forensic results from Redford's shed, and digital records tracing Ash's journey from racing prospect to wounded survivor. Eliza wore her best jeans and a navy blazer that once belonged to her mother. Her hands trembled, but her eyes burned with steady resolve. Outside the courthouse, Ash waited in the shade of an old oak tree. Deputy Hall had personally overseen her transport, making sure the mare arrived calm and unharmed. The plan was to use Ash as visual evidence, so the jury could see the toll of Redford's cruelty up close. Eliza stood beside her, stroking the mare's neck, feeling the tension in every muscle. Ash blinked slowly, ears flicking, but stood firm, her silent presence more powerful than any witness. Inside, the courtroom filled with spectators, locals who had heard rumors, journalists with notebooks ready, ranchers who had lost horses of their own, and a handful of animal welfare advocates. Carl Redford, once the pride of Montana's racing scene, now sat in the defendant's chair, jaw clenched, suit wrinkled, eyes darting with unease. His lawyers, 3 of them, all sharp suits and practiced scowls, whispered and took notes. Eliza refused to meet his gaze. The proceedings began with Rachel laying out the case, the evidence of abuse, the timeline, the discovery in Redford's shed, and the testimony of Dr. Harlan and other expert witnesses. She described in careful detail each injury Ash had suffered, lash marks, burn scars, hoof infections, and the slow road to recovery that had unfolded under Eliza's care. The judge, a woman named Helen McNamara, known for her no-nonsense demeanor, listened intently. "You say this animal suffered under Mr. Redford's care. Do you have proof?" Rachel nodded. "Yes, Your Honor. We have medical records, expert affidavits, and material evidence recovered from Mr. Redford's property. We also have witnesses who can attest to his methods." The first to testify was Dr. Harlan. He took the stand with a steady gait, his voice low and unwavering as he described Ash's injuries. "These were not the result of a single accident," he explained. "They are consistent with repeated trauma, consistent with what I've seen in other horses subjected to abusive training practices." He detailed the timeline of healing, linking old wounds to new, and described how the brand beneath Ash's mane traced directly to Redford's registered stock. Next came a former stable hand, nervously ringing his cap in his lap. "I saw Mr. Redford beat them horses when they wouldn't run," the young man said, eyes down. "He'd lock 'em up. No food, just to make 'em mean. Ash, she was special, but that made it worse. He tried to break her spirit. You can see the results yourself." His voice faltered, but the courtroom was silent, hanging on every word. Redford's attorneys tried to poke holes. They suggested Ash's injuries could have come from a previous owner or an accident during transport, but Rachel pushed back with documentation, auction records, witness statements, and photos of Ash taken just days after her rescue. Every answer led back to Redford, his cruelty, his negligence, his pattern of abuse. Finally, Eliza was called to the stand. She recounted her first meeting with Ash at the auction, the silent agony in the mare's eyes, the slow process of earning her trust. Her voice wavered as she described sneaking into Redford's shed, the ropes and blood-stained whips, the night Redford broke into her barn. "Ash never fought back, not until she was cornered," Eliza said, hands clenched in her lap. "She's living proof of what happens when we look the other way." Rachel then requested permission for the jury to view Ash outside. The judge agreed. The jury, escorted by deputies, filed out to the courtyard where Ash waited. There, in the soft light beneath the oak tree, Eliza led the mare in a slow circle. She pointed out the scars, the brand, the clouded eye, each mark a page in Ash's history. Ash stood calmly, her silence speaking volumes, her head bowed but unbroken. Some jurors wiped away tears. Back inside, the prosecution rested. Redford refused to take the stand, his silence heavy with implication. His defense leaned on technicalities and cast doubt on the timeline. But the weight of evidence was undeniable. The final blow came from a former jockey, now retired, who had ridden for Redford in better years. His testimony was quiet, regretful. He always pushed too hard, always said a horse was just a tool. "I saw things, bad things, but I was scared. I'm not proud of it." His voice broke, and he looked directly at Eliza. "I should have spoken sooner. I'm sorry." The judge addressed the jury with clear, measured words. "You have seen the evidence. You have heard from the witnesses. The law requires you to weigh not just what is legal, but what is just." The deliberations were tense and drawn out. Eliza waited outside, pacing the hallway, wringing her hands. Ash grazed quietly under the watchful eyes of deputies, her presence a balm to Eliza's nerves. Clara, Rachel, and Dr. Harlan sat nearby, offering quiet words of comfort. When the jury returned, the verdict was clear. Guilty on multiple counts of animal cruelty, with recommendations for further investigation into Redford's other operations. The judge's voice rang out, unyielding. "Mr. Redford, you will face the consequences of your actions. This community will not tolerate cruelty, human or animal." Tears slipped down Eliza's cheeks, relief and justice mingling in her chest. The courtroom erupted in whispers and applause. Outside, Eliza knelt beside Ash, wrapping her arms around the mare's neck. "We did it, girl," she whispered. "No more shadows. You're safe." Ash lowered her head, pressing gently into Eliza's shoulder, and for the first time, the scars seemed to fade, replaced by hope, resilience, and the promise of a new beginning. The days after the trial were a kind of waking from a nightmare, the world outside Eliza's little farm changing in ways she'd hardly dared to hope for. The news about Redford's conviction swept through Bozeman and the neighboring counties, and suddenly, Eliza was no longer just the crazy woman who'd bought a broken horse. She was a symbol of something bigger, the fight for justice, for compassion, for the silent and the wounded. But for Eliza, the true work was only just beginning. She knew what Ash needed most was time and space to heal, and so she devoted herself to transforming her family's old barn and the surrounding fields into a place of safety. The idea came to her late one night as she sketched by lantern light. What if Ash's journey could help others? Not just wounded horses, but wounded people too. Out of that idea, the Ashlight Sanctuary was born. The renovation started with the barn. Eliza and Clara worked side by side, stripping out rotten beams, repairing stalls, sanding rough wood until it was smooth beneath their fingers. Neighbors stopped by with tools, lumber, and casseroles. Even some of the ranchers who'd once doubted her brought truckloads of hay and fencing materials. Rachel Bell and Dr. Harlan visited with their families on weekends, painting walls and telling stories. The entire community, it seemed, was ready for something new. A way to turn all the pain and anger of the past into hope. Ash watched the transformation with quiet eyes, her presence a gentle reminder of why they worked so hard. Each day, Eliza led her through the pastures, letting her graze and feel the sun on her back. Ash's coat thickened, her scars softened, and she grew stronger, her steps surer. Other rescued horses joined them, a bay gelding named Bandit, a soft-eyed roan called Penny, a spunky chestnut mare named Cricket. Each had their own story of suffering, but under Eliza's care, they found a sense of belonging. Ash became the heart of the sanctuary. She was patient with the other horses, never nipping or kicking. Eliza often found her standing quietly beside the new arrivals, lowering her head so they could touch noses, letting them know they were not alone. Sometimes at night, Eliza would hear the gentle thud of hooves as Ash led her little herd in slow, looping circles in the moonlight, teaching them how to trust the world again. But the sanctuary wasn't just for animals. Inspired by Rachel, who knew the social workers in town, Eliza opened the doors to troubled youth from Bozeman and beyond. Some were foster kids, some on the verge of falling through the cracks, all of them carrying scars that didn't show on the outside. At first, they came reluctantly, eyes guarded, shoulders hunched. Eliza introduced them to the horses in quiet, careful ways, showing them how to groom, how to fill water buckets, how to clean stalls. She explained how horses, like people, needed time to feel safe. The work was simple but grounding, and slowly walls began to come down. One boy, Marcus, barely spoke at first, but he spent hours in the paddock with Bandit, whispering secrets into the old gelding's mane. A girl named Emily, angry at the world, found purpose teaching Penny to walk with a lead. Clara taught the kids how to mend fences, and drive the old tractor, and Rachel hosted writing workshops in the loft, encouraging them to share their stories. Sometimes, at the end of a long day, everyone would gather around a campfire, roasting marshmallows, and listening to Eliza's stories of Ash, how she'd survived the worst and learned to trust again. Ash, for her part, seemed to understand her role. She was especially gentle with the children, lowering her head to let the smallest one stroke her nose. Her silence became a comfort, an unspoken promise that healing wasn't about words, but about showing up, day after day, even when it was hard. Eliza's life changed too. She found herself smiling more, the old ache in her chest softening each time she saw Ash running across the fields, mane streaming like a banner. The farm filled with new sounds, laughter, hammering, the happy chaos of animals and teenagers learning to believe in themselves again. It was noisy and sometimes overwhelming, but it was alive in a way Eliza hadn't felt since she was a child. News of Ashlight Sanctuary spread, local news stations came to do interviews, and a photographer from a national animal welfare magazine spent a week capturing the beauty and resilience of the place. Letters and emails poured in from across the country, from people who wanted to help, people who wanted to learn, people who needed to believe that healing was possible. One evening, as the sun set golden across the fields, Eliza stood at the barn door watching Ash and her new family graze. The barn's old sign, freshly painted by one of the volunteers, read, "Ashlight Sanctuary, a place for second chances." Below it, smaller letters declared, "Horses Healing Hearts." Eliza looked around, at Clara, laughing with the kids as they finished a mural on the barn wall, at Rachel and Dr. Harlan sharing stories by the fence, at the horses, heads together, tails swishing in the warm light. She felt the weight of her grief finally lift, replaced by gratitude and awe. The pain of the past wasn't gone, but it had been transformed, woven into something strong and bright. She knelt beside Ash, pressing her forehead to the mare's neck. "Look at what you started, girl," she whispered. "Look at all this light." Ash nickered softly, a sound full of calm and promise, and in that moment Eliza knew that the sanctuary wasn't just a place, it was a testament. A testament that even the most broken beings could rise, heal, and help others do the same. Summer at Ashlight Sanctuary brought new faces, new stories, and sometimes new burdens. The fields were alive with wildflowers and the laughter of children, but not every visitor arrived with a light heart. One afternoon, as a line of thunderheads gathered on the horizon, a county social worker's dusty minivan rolled into the drive and parked near the barn. Eliza was mending a paddock fence when she saw the social worker step out, guiding a girl no older than 13 toward the barn. The girl's thin arms were wrapped tight around her own chest, her black hair falling across her face. She wore a threadbare hoodie, despite the heat, and didn't look up even as the horses, curious, ambled toward the fence. The social worker introduced herself as Maria and explained quietly, "This is Skye. She's been through a lot. She's not talking much right now, but I thought the sanctuary might help." Her voice was gentle, weighted with worry and hope. Skye stood silent, shoulders hunched, eyes fixed on the ground. Eliza knelt to her level, offered a soft smile, and said, "You don't have to say anything, honey. You can just be here, let the horses do the talking." Skye gave no sign she'd heard, but Maria gently squeezed her shoulder and left her in Eliza's care for the day. Eliza led her around the sanctuary, showing her the garden, the chicken coop, the busy workshop where kids painted signs and built birdhouses. Other teens played soccer or brushed bandit in the shade, but Skye hovered at the edge of every group, silent and untouchable, a shadow flickering between moments. When they reached the barn, Ash stood in her stall, watching them approach. The white mare had become more confident with time, yet retained her uncanny ability to sense pain in others. She stepped forward, head low, her gait slow and careful, as if she didn't want to scare the girl. Skye stopped in her tracks, eyes wide. Eliza let the silence stretch. "This is Ash," she whispered. "She used to be afraid of everyone. She didn't trust anybody at first. But she's learning, just like we all are." Skye said nothing. She stared at Ash, her breath coming faster. Eliza stepped back, signaling to Sky that there was no pressure. Ash, sensing the girl's fear and sadness, waited, still as a statue, her one good eye fixed on Sky. The other clouded, but open, gentle. Minutes passed. Sunlight crept through the cracks in the barn wall, painting gold across Ash's white coat. The barn was quiet, except for the soft sounds of horses chewing hay and a single bird chirping from the rafters. And then, something changed. Sky took a tentative step closer, her hands balled into fists. Ash flicked an ear, lowering her head even further, so her nose was at the level of Sky's trembling fingers. The girl reached out, hesitated, then brushed her hand across Ash's flank. It was a fleeting touch, almost a question, but Ash didn't move away. Instead, she let out a gentle breath, warm and real. A single tear slid down Sky's cheek. She kept her eyes on Ash's coat, barely whispering, She's not scared of me." Eliza's heart twisted. She moved quietly, sitting on a hay bale nearby, careful not to break the moment. She saw Sky's entire posture begin to shift, shoulders loosening, chin rising, the tiniest flicker of wonder in her expression. The rest of the afternoon, Sky stayed close to Ash. She watched as Eliza cleaned the stall, mimicked her movements, brushing Ash's mane, even refilled the water bucket. When another volunteer approached, Sky shrank back, but Ash's calm presence seemed to anchor her. For the first time since arriving, Sky looked up at the open barn door, letting the sunlight fall across her face. Later, as rain began to patter softly on the tin roof, Eliza invited Sky to join the evening chores. The other kids made space for her, sensing her fragility. Marcus, the quiet boy who loved Bandit, offered her a brush. Emily showed her how to gather eggs from the chicken coop. Sky didn't speak, but she followed every instruction, her gaze always returning to Ash as if afraid the mare might disappear. That night, as the group sat around the campfire roasting marshmallows, Sky sat on the outer ring, hugging her knees, eyes fixed on the flames. The others laughed and told stories, and for a long while, Sky simply listened. But when Clara told a tale about the night Ash broke down her stall to protect Eliza, Sky's lips parted. She leaned in, her eyes reflecting the firelight. After most of the others had drifted off to bed, Sky lingered by the paddock, watching Ash graze in the moonlight. Eliza joined her, settling quietly beside the girl. Sky finally spoke, voice a ragged whisper. She sees me, like she knows. Like she's not just a horse. Eliza nodded, her voice gentle. She does know. Ash has been hurt too. Sometimes, the ones who've suffered most see the truth in others. It's like looking in a mirror. Sky let the words settle. She pressed her cheek to the fence rail, silent tears sliding down her face, but she didn't hide this time. She reached out again, brushing her fingers through the fence to stroke Ash's shoulder. The mare leaned in, pressing gently against the girl's touch. The next morning, Sky surprised everyone by being the first to the barn. She waited by Ash's stall, holding a brush. Eliza found her there and smiled, handing Sky a bucket of oats. As they worked together, Sky began to speak more, first to Ash, in whispers, then shyly to Eliza, and finally, with halting words, to the other kids. The transformation was slow, but steady. Sky started joining the group meals, volunteering to help with chores, laughing, quietly at first, then louder, freer. The others welcomed her into their circle, giving her space, but never letting her feel alone. Eliza kept watch, knowing healing didn't happen all at once. But every day she saw Sky grow, each word, each smile, each act of trust a step out of the darkness. And always, at the center of it all, was Ash, the mare who had once been nothing but scars and silence, now the anchor that held them all together. On Sky's last day at the sanctuary before returning to her foster home, she stood by Ash's side, stroking her neck. She turned to Eliza and whispered, "Thank you for believing I could be more than my past." Eliza hugged her, eyes stinging. "We all can, Sky. That's what this place is for." And as Sky walked away, her head held higher than when she'd arrived, Eliza looked at Ash. Her old wounds faded, her spirit shining, and felt hope blooming in every corner of the barn. The sanctuary wasn't just changing horses and children, it was changing everything. 1 year had passed since that first desperate bid at the Bozeman auction. Montana's long winter had given way to another wild, flower-strewn summer, and Ashlight Sanctuary thrived with the heartbeat of second chances. The barn, once dark and forgotten, was now the center of a living community. Faded scars told stories on both animals and people, but the air rang with laughter, hoofbeats, and hope. Eliza found herself waking each morning before sunrise, eager to see what new miracle might unfold. On this morning, as the sun crested the far hills, a quiet excitement buzzed through the sanctuary. It was the day of the trust-building circle, a tradition Eliza and Clara had started with the children and horses, meant to honor the steps of healing and connection. The whole community gathered near the old paddock, where wildflowers danced in the breeze and the mountains watched like sentinels. Eliza glanced over the circle she'd chalked in the earth, her heart swelling at the sight of how far they'd come. Horses and humans stood together, no longer divided by fear or suspicion. Sky, now taller and surer, arrived early. Her foster family had brought her for the event, and she walked straight to Ash, who stood at the head of the line. Ash, the white mare who had once flinched at every touch, now lifted her head with gentle pride. Her once clouded eye was brighter, her coat sleek, and her body strong beneath the soft sunlight. Scars remained, but they no longer defined her. They simply proved she had survived. The procession began quietly. One by one, the rescued horses, Bandit, Penny, Cricket, and others, were led into the circle by the children who had bonded with them over the past year. The crowd watched as the horses moved in slow, graceful arcs, guided not by force but by trust and gentle encouragement. Eliza smiled as Sky, brush in hand, walked beside Ash. Sky's transformation was evident in the way she held herself. Back straight, chin up, eyes bright. She stroked Ash's mane, murmuring soft words that only the horse could hear. For a moment, it was as if the world had shrunk to just the two of them, survivor and survivor, sharing a language of kindness deeper than words. After the circle, the community gathered for a picnic by the barn. Laughter and music filled the air, and Eliza moved from group to group, greeting old friends and new volunteers, watching as children played tag in the long grass. Some of the sanctuary's earliest supporters, Rachel, Dr. Harlan, Deputy Hall, sat together, remembering the dark days and marveling at how the light had returned. As the sun dipped lower, Eliza slipped away for a quiet moment of reflection. She found Sky and Ash at the mural on the barn wall, a new painting, still fragrant with drying color. The mural showed Ash, strong and proud, standing beside Sky beneath a sky streaked with dawn. In the mural's background, the barn glowed with soft yellow light, while wildflowers and mountain silhouettes framed the scene. Sky had been one of the lead artists. She stepped back now, cheeks flushed with pride, and smiled at Eliza. I wanted it to show how she used to be, and how she is now. Eliza nodded, voice husky. You did more than that, Sky. You showed everyone what healing looks like. For a moment, they stood together, silent. Then Sky turned to a visitor, a volunteer from out of town who'd come to learn about Ashlight's program, and traced her finger along the painted outline of the mare. She used to be glass, Sky said quietly. If you touched her too hard, she'd break. But now she's fireproof. She holds all that pain and still shines. Eliza felt tears prick her eyes. She remembered the girl Sky had been when she arrived, silent, closed off, afraid of even a kind touch. She remembered Ash on that first night, shivering in the shadows, not eating, unable to trust anyone. Both had been so fragile, so breakable. And yet here they stood, whole and strong, not because they'd forgotten their pain, but because they'd learned to live beyond it. As the sky flared with the colors of evening, the sanctuary filled with music. Clara playing guitar, the kids singing along, the horses grazing peacefully in the fading light. The barn doors glowed with golden warmth, and Eliza thought of all the stories that had led them here. The risks taken, the terrors faced, the slow, stubborn work of rebuilding. Later, as families packed up to leave and the last rays of sunlight slipped away, Eliza stood in the quiet barn, her hand resting on Ash's neck. She thought of everyone who had ever felt broken by grief, by cruelty, by the careless hands of fate, and she wished they could see this place, feel this peace, know that healing wasn't just a word or a hope, but a living, breathing promise. In the hush that followed, Skye approached once more, brushing Ash's flank with gentle confidence. She turned to Eliza and grinned, a spark of mischief in her eyes. "You know what I learned from her? You don't have to be unbreakable. You just have to keep shining, no matter what." Eliza hugged her, laughing through her tears, and knew she would remember this moment for the rest of her life. As the night deepened and the stars blinked on, Ash stood guard in the pasture, her body outlined in silver. From fragile glass to fireproof soul, she was proof that the most broken things could become the strongest, the bravest, the most beautiful. And as the world turned, somewhere out there, maybe in the heart of a listener or the hands of a child, another story of healing was just beginning. Underscore, 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 underscore. If Ash's journey touched your heart, don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel. Share this story with someone who needs a little hope. And remember, no one is too broken to find their light again.